History is not lived in multiples of 10, but we commemorate with tens. So this is a big year for philosophical commemoration. This year marks 40 years, so a generation, maybe a little bit more, since Foucault, a singular figure at the height of an intellectual vanguard of one, was suddenly lost due to AIDS. And Immanuel Kant, born 300 years ago. Foucault began his career in 55-56 by researching and writing on Kant's anthropology. It's known that Foucault's career was incomplete, and yet rarely does the literature on Foucault truly grapple, truly contend with the radically incomplete nature of Foucault's work. There is this attempt to divide Foucault's career into three distinct periods with three distinct research targets, three distinct methodologies. The first one begins with Kant. The next one begins with Discipline and Punish, the work on the prison. The final one dates to the early 80s, up to his death, where he focused almost exclusively on antiquity in both his lectures and the books he managed to publish. But as all of Foucault's unpublished lectures and other unpublished writings have come out over the last 40 years, it's doubtful that anyone can really attach much weight to this trifold division anymore. The radical incompleteness of Foucault's work lies in the fact that he never had any one of these domains, any one of these three domains in hand. Kant, whose anthropology Foucault began his career studying, is more often seen as complete. The three critiques are seen as a working unity that set the groundwork for modern philosophy. And yet, when one takes seriously the works outside the critiques, as Foucault did by studying the anthropology, one sees that Kant was struggling to integrate social material into his apparently self-supporting, trifold, critical project. So we can say that for Kant, even during the writings of the three critiques, things were already getting out of hand. I think it's worthwhile to bring up a comparison here. Look from the year 20 forward, 40 years. You go from Christ alive to St. Paul and his approximate death. How much did the doctrine of Christianity change in those 40 years? And then look 300 years forward from 24 to the year 324, the Council of Nicaea, the Christianization of the Roman Empire, the consolidation from Kant to Foucault and the post-Foucauldian era. We're looking at about the same time range. Of course, the amount of text and evidence on both Kant and Foucault compared to the evidence of, let's say, Christian teachings before Paul is an order of magnitude difference, or two or three orders of magnitude in difference from Foucault's corpus to the corpus of Christ, so to speak. And yet, has the doctrine been transmitted? Is not modern philosophy's doctrine as mysterious? And by modern philosophy, I should be saying theory. Now, 300 plus or minus 40 years is a pretty amazing unit if you're trying to look at events in the history of reason. I just have to point this out. I started our post-Foucauldian moment back 300 plus or minus 40 years. You're in Kant's Enlightenment. Back 300 plus or minus 40 years, Italian Renaissance and the Columbian Exchange. Go back another 300 plus or minus 40. Some events, well, maybe not everyone would link these all up, but you got around Duns Scotus writing in Western philosophy, Ibn Arabi in the Mediterranean, and you have the Magna Carta. Another 300 plus or minus 40, and you have really the golden age of Zen koans in the Tang Dynasty, China. Another 300 plus or minus 40 back, Muhammad and Bodhidharma, that century, the 6th century. Go back again, same unit, Nicaea. Go back again, same unit, you have Christ. Go back the same unit. You don't quite get to Socrates, but you are in the post-Socratic era of philosophy. Another one, around the earliest dates for Tao Te Ching composition and also Buddhism. Another 300 plus or minus 40, and that's where you have the first events, well, not Eden, but maybe some of the other historical figures, insofar as they may have existed. Abraham and Moses probably going on around 1000 BC. And also the I Ching. Earliest evidence around 1000 BC. There's your history of reason. Anything before that, I would have to go, if you're doing intellectual history, I would say it would have to be the history of ritual before that. Or let's say an anthropology of religion and theocratic politics. After that, you can have history of reason. So I'm not claiming anything transcendental in terms of a meaning for this unit. Although, 300 plus or minus 40, this is 10 generations. What I am saying is that from Kant to Foucault, this is an epoch. This is an epoch. Our epoch. Or the epoch we're leaving. What was it? The Enlightenment. Kant's Enlightenment was the turn from believing that our perceptions gave us true reality, leaving that behind, understanding that truth comes from our reason, our pure reason, our thoughts. And we are to base our lives on that reason. We are to treat each other according to reason, which we develop through our experience, perceiving and living in the world. But the truth comes from our reason, not from what we perceive. Problem is, not everyone is going to come to realize this. Kant expressly said, most people are evil. So there's still this, I guess it's a motivation in Kant to motivate, a motivation to motivate the turn, the enlightenment towards reason, which will bring society towards a kingdom of ends where we are, as a species or as a society, that kingdom of ends, everyone is treated as an end in themselves and not as a means. The means aren't put before the ends. The highest ends of reason are what structures society, because everyone is living according to reason. Their actions are structured as if they should be a law for everyone. Everyone acts as if their actions should be a law for everyone. That was the dream. But the motivation for that, Kant looked at the sublime as a possibility. The experience of the sublime in art or in nature was going to motivate people to understand that their perceptions are not adequate to reality, only their internal reason. And then through that, they're going to want to apply reason in society. But that never seemed to be enough, and he never wanted to let go of enthusiasm. Or was enthusiasm just somehow equivalent to a kind of sublime? How is this kingdom of ends going to be motivated? When he's looking in history, anthropology, and religion, or maybe education, it seems like he's searching for the mechanism of history that's going to lead towards reason's victory and the bringing about of the kingdom of ends. This is a problem, like how does the reasonable subject locate his or herself in history? What did Foucault think about it? Well, since we've already been looking at Deleuze's version of Foucault, let me point out that Deleuze did not adhere to that threefold division, although he does acknowledge that some of Foucault's work deals with power as it relates to articulable knowledge. Other of Foucault's work dealt with visible knowledge in relation to power, like the prison, where people have to look at each other. And Deleuze's study attempts to integrate an analysis of both ancient Greek ideas in philosophy and modern thinkers to bring together all of these. Great thing about this diagram, I would just propose, well, as an interesting exercise, Deleuze said, perhaps every philosopher recapitulates the history of philosophy in his own way. Well, what if every philosopher recapitulated this diagram to rename this diagram in their own way? Could be interesting to just go through and point out, in a sense, to turn this diagram into a meme for each philosopher. Foucault, from essentially the apex of humanistic reflection, contemporary thought, saw that the Kantian Enigma that for nearly 200 years has stupefied Western thought, making thought blind to thought's own modernity, brings two central figures to mind. There is a double nostalgia, born at the end of the 18th century with the modern world. On the one hand, nostalgia for the Greek world, to which we appeal in order to elucidate our relation to being. And on the other hand, there's a nostalgia for the 18th century, to which we appeal in order to put the forms and limits of our knowledge into question. So there's a Hellenistic dynasty from the poet Hölderlin to Heidegger, and on the other hand, the modern Enlightenment Aufklärung that runs from Marx to Levi-Strauss. Perhaps Nietzsche's monstrosity is to belong to both. On the one side, tragedy, on the other side, the encyclopedia. This is the dilemma from which modern thought, the dilemma that still dominates us, but which we already feel vacillating beneath our feet, the dilemma from which modern thought has still been unable to escape. These are the two questions of theory, the theologico-political, the answers to which theory always sought with the Greeks or perhaps Christianity, and on the other hand, the capitalism and schizophrenia problem. The attempt to define enlightenment and its goals, where Foucault saw his own work in the last 5 years of his life. Between these two, the Hellenistic nostalgia or the nostalgia for the possibilities of political, economic enlightenment, the way that the intellectual in modernity, the long 20th century, the theorist experienced that was through these two questions. Kant sometimes credits the ancient world. He says that, Plato pointed out that perception doesn't give us true reality, but he didn't know where to go with that. Foucault's studies of antiquity and Christianity. This was an attempt to axialize. Karl Jaspers coined the term the axial, the birth of the religions as we know it. Jaspers' axialization was rather weak. Foucault's was strong but limited, connecting the Greeks and Christianity. Well, what people have recognized, including Francois Ewald, is that Foucault's axialization of Christianity with Greek philosophy via the Cynics. When you look at Foucault, when you fold Foucault's studies of antiquity into his assessments of the capitalism and schizophrenia problem of enlightenment, you get that axialization in contact with problems of neoliberalism, the theorizations of neoliberalism, the re-theorization of capitalism as a system of spontaneous order. Capitalism is itself a game of truth. The intellectual brings the game of truth of capitalism into contact with an axialization. This is really what I've been trying to do with especially Belief-O-Nomics, which is the book 3 that I'm working on presenting this year, 2024, my off-course texts project, and I hope you'll check out some of the informative materials that I have here on my YouTube channel related to Belief-O-Nomics or Why Philosophy Fails. In earlier incarnations, I've thought about it as the axial origins of capitalism, or perhaps ancient origins of modern thought, but I think it's actually much more than that. Right now I am focusing on so-called philosophy in Belief-O-Nomics, so I hope you will continue to follow with us and learn why philosophy fails. That said, a lot of people are going to say, a lot of people say that you're talking about Deleuze and that's philosophy, so how can you possibly be doing that? How can you possibly be doing Trump impression in a video about philosophy? And we'll look at what Deleuze's philosophy was. Deleuze's philosophy is Spinoza's boot, crushing the faces of Hegel and Wittgenstein forever. This is a poison pill for modern professorial philosophy. It's a shame, there's a lot of nasty comments in Kant about Spinoza. And it's just, was he not projecting? Some of these comments about Spinoza, aren't these not the anxieties that Kant had about his own philosophy? This is the end of the Delezean century this year, because Deleuze will be 100 in January. Foucault is the one who said, someday this century will be known as the Delezean century. Which century exactly? I mean, it couldn't be any earlier than the century that starts with Deleuze's birthday. 100 years, it's going to be next year. Foucault's 100 years is just the next year too. And so I hope you will join me for the next video in this series, the end of the Delezean century, or the image of Spinoza's boot crushing the faces of Hegel and Wittgenstein forever. The final promotional video for Belief-O-Nomics. When Deleuze shows these strata where in Kant we really just had practical reason, Foucault took seriously that knowledge is dangerous, actually. Knowledge has evil in it. So there is this idea of doing a kind of surgery, a surgical investigation of the almost dead, alive thinkers who formed modern thought, thereby finding the evil which is not only in a malattachment to the noumena, which seems to be what Kant had going on there. And yet once the anthropology happens, and Foucault looked at the anthropology, even in Kant you can see this, that there is an observation of evil there, and yet how to fit that into the critical project. Kant never figured it out. As Marc Djaballah puts it, Foucault saw that there was a gap opened up by the Kantian Enigma between conceiving human rationality as finite and, on the other hand, as contingent on history. It seems like part of what Foucault respected about Kant, and yet what he felt like he had to repair, was this separation between a critical project that was in so many ways a spiritual exercise, then on the other hand, this remaining need to understand what happens to practical reason when relationships are shaped by knowledge and history, when relationships of knowledge are shaped by history, when relationships of history are shaped by knowledge. Deleuze liked to talk about Foucault's work as a work of diagrams. And the biggest need for a diagram or a map is the one that's going to link enlightenment, capitalism, Marx, schizophrenia, that question of theory, to an axialization, or the theologico-political question. So that diagram, that map, produced by a kind of archaeological surgery, is going to enable alliances. Actually, it seems like the word that Spinoza uses is not alliances, but harmony. When men live according to reason with each other, that is harmony. I want to juxtapose that with a quote from Foucault, which is not in any of his books or lectures. It's reported speech from Dreyfus and Rabineau. They report that Foucault said, one of the best quotes from Foucault, "People know what they do. Frequently they know why they do what they do. What they fail to understand is what they do does. What they do not know is what they do does." It's important here because in Kant's way of thinking, can we ever know what our moral actions actually do? Because there's an empirical problem here. Foucault pointed this out, that the movement of Kantian thought has a problem that is hard to unravel. The empiricity in the anthropologico-critical repetition. Does not a science of man in anthropology fit into philosophy's trajectory toward itself? Like, we need to investigate what we do does in order to live by reason. That means we have to look into history in order to live by reason. That history is going to be primarily a history of, well, some would say a history of philosophy. How about a history of reason? We can see this problem if we think, what would a Kantian axialization look like? There are two fragments, one from Kant's writings on Schwärmerei, and another from a letter that give us an idea of what Kant saw in the axial turn. Superstitious religion bases itself on a principle of subjecting reason to the delusions of perception. So the axial and the Enlightenment taking up of the axial legacy is a turn away from superstitious religion, from perception's dominance over reason, the rise of pure reason. And Kant saw this as part of Greek philosophy and Christianity, his axialization. He said, dogmas tell us only what God has done to help us see our frailty in seeking justification before him, whereas the moral teachings of Christ, roughly, tell us what we must do to make ourselves worthy of justification. So Kant's axialization is the emergence of pure reason. And in enlightenment, we learn this. We know ourselves, but what we know is that we can't know, and we can't know what we do does. So we have to instead become a part of a network in a sense. Like if you take that diagram of Kant's subjects of pure reason and make it go in time, line it up in time, in a sense what you have is this connection of geniuses in history, genius being a key category in the critique of judgment. But what would a Foucauldian axialization look like? And we can't really know. This is the problem, is that there are perhaps, a coherent viewpoint on parrhesia and Greek thought, perhaps a united idea of modernity and the idea that power is productive of knowledge, and this is the modern order. Maybe we can get an idea of what Foucault's interpretation of Oedipus and the meaning of Oedipus really was. To create a Foucauldian axialization, however, and put that axialization in contact with Enlightenment and modernity, we kind of have to go beyond what Foucault, let's say, found acceptable to talk about. This reported speech from Dreyfus and Rabineau gives us a clue, though. Why was Foucault's axialization more than Kant's axialization? Foucault's axialization would have been more. People knowing why, or people being able to answer the question, why are you doing that? Well, that's different from them knowing, being able to say what they do does. The difference was discovered by Socrates. In dialogue, people cannot simply answer a quick question to end the conversation, answer the question why. Instead, they have to describe what they do does. Dialogue, it forces people to interact on the basis of reason, describing what they do does. This is what dialogue does. When Socrates, in this axialization, discovers that people do not know what they do does, this is a discovery that there's a problem with belief. This introduces a term that Foucault explicitly refused, this idea of belief. And yet there is a Foucauldian definition of belief. If you believe in what you do, if you believe in your truth acts, it's belief applied to action as opposed to some kind of logical proposition or some piece of an ideology, although ideology will come into play. Foucault, especially in the lectures on cynicism, where he describes cynic philosophy and Christianity as it followed from cynicism, as a war against conventional behavior, a war against imitative norms, against people not knowing, not caring, not dialoguing about what they did. And in the West, in Greco-Roman society, in the Hellenistic world, this was the axial turn, the discovery of the problem of convention, where ritual had failed. Did Foucault see this in Oedipus? This is something I want to understand in the next video about Deleuze. And I've also talked a lot more about this, let's call it structure of belief and convention, drawing on this amazing quote from Foucault, where he differentiates himself from Kant in terms of the potentials of Foucauldian axialization, greater than Kant, in seeking the axial origins of enlightenment.